Wow, I'm really late to the party. Let's break the ice here for a second. You are probably going to disagree with me when it comes to the Middle-earth movies. That's fine, I've accepted it. It's not the first time the majority of my viewership is likely to disagree with me. I think one's takeaway with this series completely relies on when you decided to watch it, and whether or not you were able to watch them all back to back at that particular time. I was, and I did. I saw The Lord of the Rings way too late in life to consider the whole thing anything particularly profound or life-changing. My main interest in them sparks from a film fan inside. The world building, whether it be via the extra attention to detail in its rich mythology, the set designs, or its visual effects, is unmatched. The score is one of the best composed for a series of films, and I really do respect Peter Jackson's attempts at keeping true to the integrity of the original source, even if it does mean making each movie 3 hours long. It's an incredible feat of ambitious filmmaking which should not go unrecognised, and it's also just a nice middle finger to the studios that tend to try to minimalise pictures, be it through dumbing down the stories or cutting the flicks to death in editing to keep it a particular runtime. There are a lot of great moments, alongside some memorable characters and cool fight scenes. However, as movies on their own, they all have considerable pacing problems, none of which complement the runtimes, and so I find them extremely challenging to sit through. I think they work best as flicks which contain awesome iconic moments, rather than working as overall films in their own rights. The Hobbit films, on the other hand, I've really enjoyed, with flaws and all. It could easily be argued that they share some similar problems. Each flick has had to stretch almost every scene, scenes which would have been roughly 3 pages in the original book, into these huge action set pieces. That inherently comes with the territory if you're adapting one short children's story for bedtime into 3 2.5 hour long movies, and I can't really say that the trilogy got a proper handle on its tone until Desolation of Smaug. And yet, besides finding them to be far more well-structured, better-paced, cohesive movies in general, there's also just something a little warmer about these ones, I find. The significant downgrade in scale of the plot, along with what is a far more interesting portrayal of Bilbo Baggins, results in a story which feels far more intimate and personal. Freeman injects so much personality into this character. There's an innocence about this simple adventure, and the overuse of CGI, which many claim to be a problem, I actually find helps the world of Middle-earth feel more like an otherworldly, magical fantasy universe. I'm not sure that I can say with absolute conviction that Battle of the Five Armies is as good as its predecessors, but what I can say is that I did wholeheartedly enjoy it the most out of all the others. That probably has a big thing to do with this basically being the climax of the story stretched into an entire movie, and while it never manages to wholly tell us why this needed to be 3 films, it means the whole thing is pretty much full of nothing but fist-pumping action finales that I honestly couldn't give a shit. Our story, picking up after the events from Desolation in which the dwarves have forced the dragon out of the mountain, Smaug sets course to Lake Town to wreak havoc and exact vengeance. This results in an opening sequence which is indisputably meant to be the end of the last movie, but is the flick's highlight nonetheless. And finally getting to see why so much screen time in the predecessor was devoted to Luke Evans as Bard is a crowd-pleasing moment. The innate problem, however, with this whole meant to be the end of the last movie conundrum does mean that Smaug is not in it all that much, and the big overarching threat of the character, which was the driving motivation towards taking back the mountain in the last movie, gets erased quite early on. I'd say based on the title I'd kinda guessed that he wasn't going to be the centerpiece this time round, but I understand if fans get disappointed by his exit. I personally thought it made for a great opening despite the story problems. What transpires thereafter focuses on an all-out war fighting for the Lone Mountain. This becomes further complicated by Thorin's increasingly troubling descent into madness in an attempt to keep it for the dwarves and no one else, not even the people of Lake Town who've since lost their home. This all results in a battle which, in concept, seems like it could have the potential for some genuine weight. None of these people, minus the orcs of course, who by the way only feel as if they're in this to appease Lord of the Rings fans, want to fight. They're good individuals who, due to these harsh circumstances, are forced to start butting heads over this gold. Unfortunately, the editing struggles to be clear on how many armies there actually are. The title says 5, so you think there's no question, yet when I watched it, my count changed from about 4 to 7, it's really not very clear. And so every time another group does show up to say, hey, we're part of this fight too, it plays out more comedic than upping the ante. The movie's strongest element comes from the characters, mainly Bilbo Baggins and Thorin Oakenshield, while our main protagonist seems to be slipping into the background with each further addition to the trilogy, which I guess kinda comes with the territory when you have 5 armies and a little hobbit. He still tries as hard as he can to be the voice of reason. He morally grounds the characters to stop and think about what's going on for a moment, and every time the Shire theme creeps back into the score to remind us of the heart and soul that the character embodies, it's hard not to get a little choked up. One of the things Armies does get right with its story is that you're never made to dislike Thorin. Richard Armitage's endearing performance makes you root for the character to see the error of his ways and do the right thing. That's a difficult balance to get, and one he achieves flawlessly. though not till after a visually over-the-top nightmare sequence visualizing his descent into madness. I will say as well that there's a strange amount of focus on this one comic relief bad guy character, which never quite goes anywhere nor had me laughing at any particular point. Yet, look, it's not the best one of these we've had, and that's a shame. Jackson and company clearly aren't trying to gain any new fans or outdo what they've done before, probably because there's no way that Rings will happen twice ever, but it does do a very swift job of serving as a fun Super Smash Bros. Brawl for the Middle-earth series, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't worry and therefore root for the characters to win the day. The Hobbit movies have been called a lot of things over time, but I've never seen them as anything more than Jackson coming back for more fun. A lot of the stuff in these play out like someone going, well, that was pointless, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I enjoyed it. And while the argument that he added all this extra stuff in to improve on the story could have been made a more solid counter-argument had this final chapter been more than just a serviceable wrap-up for the trilogy, even on a bad day he packs it with enough visual wonder, heart-stopping action and interesting characters that I can't say that it's ever bothered me or that I've ever lost interest. And speaking as an average moviegoer for a moment, there are some badass fights in this, it's worth seeing for that alone. Cheers for watching guys, and as always if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel.